in November 2021, you started Corrode.dev, which is a Rust consultancy company where you help clients to build reliable services with Rust. Like my first question is, why did you start this journey?
At some point, working at Trivago, I realized that I wanted to do Rust full time. I think the market was pretty early. I had a couple of customers in mind. I had a couple of ideas, but nothing too concrete. But I knew that I wanted to do more Rust and do so full time. And at the same time, I grew an interest in businesses, how businesses work, and entrepreneurship. And it's one of the things that you can not learn if you work a 9 to 5 job. Of course, you can have side projects and all of that stuff, but it's not necessarily the same experience as if you were a completely solo entrepreneur. And yeah, so I looked for options, and it pretty much became clear that I wanted to start simple, maybe have 1 or 2 customers, and yeah, take it easy and just test the waters. In the worst case, it would fail and it wouldn't be such a big deal. But it turns out, yeah, there is demand. And maybe we will get to that in a second. But the general idea is that the market is still pretty early and it's still pretty young. And there might not be full time Rust positions necessarily in all the companies. But it feels like a lot of companies are starting to understand the power of Rust. And I think it's a great market. It has a lot of growth potential, even though you will have to do integration work with existing code bases and other languages. But, that's always the case, I guess.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Uh, yeah, like my experience is the same. Like at my previous company, even if before I knew about Rust, my ex-colleagues are telling me that they are evaluating Rust for new projects and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think that's encouraging for people that are listening that maybe want to work with Rust and maybe they don't find jobs right now. So should we tell them keep going because it's it's going to happen?
Throughout my career, my mantra was to invest in growing markets, because
Mm.
then you don't have to be the sharpest tool in the tool bag. You just have to be around and you have to be involved in such things. And the market will kind of solve it for you over time. But I guess the main part is that you need to be patient and you need to be, how can I say, considerate about the constraints that you put upon yourself, because you should be flexible. You should not mainly focus on doing Rust for the sake of doing Rust. You should always solve problems for customers.
That's great advice. Yes, and yeah, like what kind of services do you offer as part of Corrode.dev for companies?
My previous occupations were around monitoring performance optimizations. And I think this is really great in Rust as well. There are a lot of companies that have problems with monitoring, have problems with performance. And this is a nice starting point for them sometimes. For example, they write small little logging tools or little command line applications, or they tweak a part of their stack that is slow. And there's a lot of tools for measuring performance. And some of that is written in Rust. So this is what I can do. I usually focus on these niche areas. And I also like to think about idiomatic Rust and web development. So these are the areas where I focus on the most right now, because this is what I learned in the past. And I'm a fan of clean code. I'm a fan of architecture. I like domain driven design. And a lot of those things can be used in Rust and surprisingly work very well out of the box. And especially when it comes to performance, you don't really have to do much to make an application very performant in Rust. And of course, what we talked about before also ties into that. You don't have a good garbage collector, so there's nothing that would stop your application and collect the garbage. And all of these things kind of add up to a very nice picture.
Absolutely, yeah. And like, do you work mainly for companies that want to adopt Rust, or for companies that already use it and maybe they need some help?
Both. There are companies that are large and they adopt Rust because of stability or because of performance reasons. I mentioned stability first because even though they usually start with a performance background or with performance in mind, usually they stick with Rust for stability. So that means less on-call outages, mm, more uptime, less server costs, and less over provisioning and all of that stuff. And this is really good. These are established companies. They usually come in because of performance issues or because they want to learn how to improve their code base, make it more idiomatic, because these are things that you cannot necessarily learn from books right now, and there are very few workshops. And yeah, this is one area. And the other area are startups that are just experimenting with completely new ideas. And they might start with something experimental, and they have a team that they need to train on Rust on the job. And for that, you need courses, you need to be a bit more hands on, do some pair programming, maybe establish the architecture. This is really interesting, like how the application itself is structured, and then teach them how they can maintain it themselves. So I would say it's both. Established companies have legacy code and performance problems and want stability. And then you got the newer companies that know that Rust can be a competitive advantage.
I see. And you also mentioned that you are in the niche of like you mentioned observability and performance. Don't you think that like Rust is already a a good niche to be in? Like for example, if you say I'm a Rust consultant, is this enough, or like you need to say you need to find the niche in the niche? So I'm a Rust consultant that is specialized in X, Y, Z.
Yeah, even though I know a lot of really great Rust developers, I have yet to meet many developers who are great in all of coding, all of the infrastructure that we have nowadays. Because remember, we talked about it before, there are projects in embedded and in infrastructure and in graphics and in machine learning and in data science and in front end and UIs and whatever. And so I think it helps if you build some expertise around either one or maybe two of these areas, and then you combine it with a really strong command of Rust. In this sense, you create a unique niche for yourself, and people will reach out for you if they have problems in this specific space. This is what I see from other consultancies as well in the Rust space. They usually pick one area and then they double down on that. And that makes a lot of sense because, yeah, companies have existing stacks, they have existing problems, and it helps them if you have some domain expertise going in. So I would advise people to look for something that they are really interested in, and maybe something that they build side projects with, and then focus on this if it is well received. That's at least what works okay for me, and maybe it would work nice for others too.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like probably companies when they reach out, of course they have a specific domain, and you should also have a knowledge about like libraries that are used in that domain and stuff like that. So of course, yeah,
Right.
you cannot know everything about
Exactly.
programming, as you said. Yeah, makes sense. And like, are there some particular works that you have done that you're proud that you want to share with us? Like, for example, some nice outcomes that you saw after your job.
I can't really name any companies, unfortunately, because I'm under NDA. But the things that I like is when people go and they understand Rust better after a workshop, for example.
Mm.
So maybe they work with, say, GraphQL and they work on a very low level and they work on routing. And then you show them a few tricks on how to handle errors better. And suddenly they understand this concept. Or you maybe have a one-on-one with someone, like a pair programming session, and suddenly they understand lower level concepts about HTTP and how web servers work. And you see in their eyes that suddenly it clicks and it's demystified. I like this moment when people understand that it's not magic. It was built by other humans and it is made to be broken and also reconstructed by humans. This is one of the nicest parts. When it comes to concrete projects, the one thing that I liked was a project around domain-driven design because it was the first bigger application that I helped with in this space, and it turned out really well. So the result was that we had to do less integration tests, and we could do a lot more with unit tests. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you have a large infrastructure with many, many microservices, booting up these microservices can take time. And if you can avoid that by having proper tests around your domains, around your entities, this can mean a 10x improvement of feedback cycle. That means your context switches are less because you can focus on a change. You can run the tests, which are unit tests. They are really quick. And suddenly you can move forward with confidence. And that saves a lot of time. That means sometimes Rust is also good for, say, fast feedback loops if you do it right and you do a lot of things at compile time. Whereas in bigger infrastructure or bigger organizations, a lot of testing is done at runtime with integration tests, or how can I say, all of these tests that happen before a deployment. Yeah, and they are usually very expensive and they take a lot of time.
Yeah, I think that so the feedback loop is fast when like the compiler tells you an error before you get it at runtime. There is still the problem of like slow compile time, and that bit slows the feedback loop. But yeah, it's a trade-off, and I like this part of the trade-off. Yeah,
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 and even more than that, if you don't have a database connection and you can, for example, have a repository which implements your database trait, then you can run unit tests where you before needed functional tests or smoke tests or at least integration tests. And yeah, suddenly you move from something that is very flaky and brittle and takes a lot of time to something that is just a quick test. And yeah, you understand that your constraints of your entities are kind of guided or guarded by the compiler and by the type system and so on. And this is a very magical moment, which probably you only learn after using Rust for a while and really leaning into the traits and the patterns of what Rust provides you.
Yeah, I agree. Like for example, you mentioned error handling. I think something it's so at the beginning it confuses you a bit, like if you're used to exceptions and stuff like that. But when it clicks, when you get it, then you want to port it on every other language. Yeah, I saw also bad ports of it to other programming languages, but yeah, it's great. Yes, and so I was curious, like how are you enjoying consultancy versus being an employee? So, what are the pros and cons of these two?
Yeah, I can see both sides. It was really nice to be an employee, not gonna lie, because a lot of the things that you need to do as a consultant are taken off of you if you're an employee. It's like having a personal secretary, someone that takes care of finding jobs, finding offers, doing advertisements and so on, and marketing and reaching out to people. This is something that you need to do on your own. And inside a company, this is very relaxing almost, I would say. It's a bit like comparing a cruise ship with a jet ski. If you're on a cruise ship, then everything is managed for you and you can focus on having a good time and really delivering value and enjoying yourself. But if you are on a jet ski, you can literally go wherever you want. It's a bit more risky and it's a bit less protected and padded, but at the same time, you have total control and total, um, yeah, choice of where you want to go next. And with a cruise ship, that's not that easy. So if you want to change the destination, then you need to convince a lot of people before that happens. This is how big organizations work sometimes. They are very slow. They sometimes move, but it takes them a while to change course. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily comparable. If you are not a person that is necessarily extroverted, or at least can convince themselves to talk to other people and have regular calls, and maybe also expose yourself in a way that, for example, you write articles or you do collaborations, or you're not afraid to talk through business negotiations, then I would say consulting is not for you. But if you say, well, I'm a little bored with one position and I would like to try something a little more exciting and I want to learn more about how different companies work, then maybe you should consider it. But I just want to say that there are also ways in between. For example, if you talk to your employer and you say, oh, yeah, I really love it here, but I would like to try this other thing and maybe I can try with 2 days per week. So I would like to work for only 3 days for this company, or maybe we can settle on 4 days. Maybe this could also work. Or you say, I really like this side project. I would like to make it a part of my job description. This might also be something that you could negotiate. So you don't have to go all in immediately.
Makes sense, yes. And so you mentioned that as a yes, as a solo entrepreneur, you need to do everything by yourself, like marketing and so on. Have you considered hiring someone else, or like using like hiring an assistant or stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't know anyone who does that. Hiring people is hard. First, you have to find the right person, then it has to click. Then they, yeah, you need to find work for them. Of course, you also need to pay them, which might be expensive depending on their salary ranges. Then you need to align your mission. You need to set objectives. You need to set away time for communication. It's a lot of things that are like hidden costs of hiring. And so a lot of people that I talk to, and me myself personally, I try to defer hiring as much as possible. I rather think that it's a bit like open source, where you can collaborate on various projects if you have separate entities. It works really well. For example, you have a bigger task or a bigger client, then it can work if both people are consultants and they collaborate, and then you share the income, for example. That is something that could work. The other thing that some people do is to go through some sort of agency where you pay them a certain cut of your revenue, and then they handle all of the paperwork for you. They send invoices. That can work too. Maybe if you find the right one, they would even manage to get you offers or positions. But at the same time, writing invoices is really not that hard if you're consistent about it. And you can get used to all of these practices as long as you're organized. Now, you need a certain level of organization and discipline. And this is another thing. No one tells you how much time you can spend on what. And it can be risky to be dragged into one thing just because you're extremely curious about it. But at the end of the day, it's still work, and you need to set constraints for yourself and for your clients. They expect you to be another company. It's not like they expect you to be an employee. You have to the responsibilities of a company. It's a B2B negotiation, and you have to be very clear about this.
I see. Uh, so one thing I noticed is that in your website, Corrode.dev, you have many blog posts about Rust, about idiomatic Rust, and stuff like that. Do you have any advice on how to write good blog posts? Maybe for the people that are listening that wants to start doing this.
The most important thing is keep writing, write more, write a lot. Initially, write about whatever you like, whatever you want to read. Start with a topic and just go for it. If you feel like you're getting bored, just switch the topic and it's fine. The motivation should be to keep writing and to take it as a practice, as something that you do as part of your work. Eventually, you will see a pattern emerge. You will probably write about the same or similar things. And this is usually a good indication that you're onto something. This is a topic that you're interested in and something that you can say a lot about, because it's not just one post, it's a series of posts. Now, once you reach this step, I would say it's a good way to stop and reflect and understand what it is that you're trying to say through all of these posts. And if you find the pattern and you find your inner motivation, this is the best that can happen, because all of a sudden you can center all of the content around it and it will feel way more natural for you. For example, for me, I wrote about a lot of side projects and topics, and I really love it. And I still do that from time to time, just on my personal blog. But on Corrode.dev, I only focus on idiomatic Rust. This is my niche that I want to focus on. And I think there's not that many articles out there. And it feels like, yeah, these articles are well received because they help people that have some prior experience with Rust, and they are interested in this content and they want to learn more about how to structure their code and how to introduce design patterns and so on. And I guess everyone can find such a niche. It could be embedded, could be machine learning, could be infrastructure, could be rewriting Bash tools or like Unix tools, to be more precise. It doesn't have to be one tool that you maybe translate. You maybe can do multiple and make a series out of it. Whatever it is, try to find something that you're passionate about and that you can write more than one article about. At least three, I would say. Three to four is good measure, and then you know you're onto something here. Yeah, so this is how I write. And I'm still really bad at writing, let me say that. I still try to improve. My writing is not decent. I'm always unhappy about what I produce, partially because I'm not a native speaker. But on the other hand, sometimes you have a really nice little idea and you iterate on it until the vision that you had in the past is completely gone and blurred. And this is so sad to see. To avoid that, I encourage you to read people like Julia Evans, who has a really nice style. And the reason why her writing is so nice is that it comes from the heart. It's very personal. She only describes what she herself has experienced. She writes stories. And this is enticing because transparency and honesty and authenticity is so important in writing. Many people write for Google, but they should instead write for humans.
Interesting. Um, so you said that you're not happy about how you write because you're not a native speaker, but I would add to this that I had from an interview to somebody who is a LinkedIn instructor that they like non-native speakers because they tend to explain concepts in an easier way. And so I think that from a certain point of view, being a non-native speaker, and of course I'm speaking for myself too, is can be an advantage because like uh, you don't use complex words and stuff like that. Yes. Also, yeah, thank you for the advice about thinking about blog post as a series and not as single shots. Yeah, this is something I never I never considered. Why do you think that it's important to consider blog posts as a series and not just as a single topic?
It's very hard to come up with topics for a single blog post. For example, if you ask me, you can only write one blog post next month, what should it be about? Then in my mind, I'm thinking it needs to be something exceptional. It needs to be great. It needs to be a work of art. It needs to represent all of the work that I did during this month. And this way, I set the expectations extremely high and the pressure rises. And the outcome will be that everyone's disappointed, the readers, the writer. It will be frustrating and it will be work. It will feel very laborious. Whereas if you pick a topic and you set yourself the goal to write at least 3 articles about it, all of a sudden you set a different guideline. You set a different pace. It's a marathon and not a sprint anymore. You start to think about the bigger picture. What is the story behind this one article? What could I say next? Because remember, I need to write 2 more articles about it. And if I like use all my bullets in the first one, I won't have any material for the next 2. So you try to be a little bit more cautious, but also coming up with this streak of articles is not easy. It's a very hard task because it's a very personal thing, and you need to reflect on your work and what you're really passionate about. If you cannot come up with such a topic, maybe you sit down, write down a few things that you're interested in, and see what they all have in common. And then ask why a few times. Like, why am I interested in this topic? And then, why is it that this interests me? Or you go down that rabbit hole, you ask why 5 times, and then all of a sudden you will find the true answer to what you want to write about. And the 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 vision or the expression you want to make. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, thank you. It was very interesting. This video was extracted from the Rust Ship podcast. You can find the full episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast client. If you liked this video and you want to learn more about Rust, subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow me on LinkedIn, X, and Mastodon. You can also share it with your colleagues if you think they would like it. Bye!